Just a little bit about Anne-Marie. So Anne-Marie is based in Dundee in Scotland. She's recently joined Outside In, and she's an artist who's working across poetry, text and mixed media. And I think some of her work, she was talking to me about finding objects in her surrounding environment, sort of found pieces from the sort of street or, you know, landscape. And some of those kind of get incorporated into her work as visual artworks. And then those objects sort of become transformed. And Anne-Marie also uses textiles, and she hand embroiders text onto the fabrics. So they're very meticulous, and she sort of explores things through those about the human condition. So I'm going to hand over to Anne-Marie to explore more about your work, Anne-Marie.
Hi there. I don't actually use that name when I'm creating. It helps me separate myself, my personal life from the outside world. I use the name V Rivers. But can I have the first slide, please? Right, so this, you know, a lot of folk have talked about lockdown, and one of the things I think we all did was get out for walks as much as we could if that was something we were able to do. So I went walking out in my local area a lot and started collecting a lot of objects that were in that just caught my eye. I only pick up things that I think are beautiful. They might not be things that other folk think are beautiful, but I do. I'm very attracted to things that are rusted, burnt, melted, broken apart, collapsing, worn down, something that's gone through transformation. Transformation's very important to, I think, to my work. These are broken suspension coils. So if you imagine a car, they have this metal coil inside and they rust over time, and when you're out driving, they'll suddenly break and part of it will come flying off and go onto the road. And they're everywhere, but we don't really notice them. And I think they're beautiful. And I found them everywhere and I found them really intriguing. So I collected some of them and brought them home. And when I found out what they were, then I knew what I wanted to make from them. I was processing grief in my life at the time, and an important part of making art for me, certainly now, is it helps me understand and process life experiences. The act of making transforms my experience of events, helps me deal with it. I can move from something very difficult to some sort of peace or a new understanding. It's a very conscious, meditative, ritual element to the making of a piece of art for me. It's transformative. So for this, I washed each broken coil and I varnished them and I partially bound them in ribbon and beaded them. So I use all reused materials pretty much, other than thread or, you know, nails, is reused materials. So for me, the fabric behind it is from an old dress of mine, and those are pine needles that I collected and washed and put in them. So I've sort of nested these, I've connected them together, and that was quite tricky because each piece that falls off a card has quite an individual shape and they don't go together all that easily. So to nestle them together took quite a bit of doing. And for me, it was a way to connect something that has been lost to the person that has experienced loss. And you can lose a lot of things. You can lose a person, a thing, a dream, a way of life. The way your life was before is also something sometimes that we have to grieve for. I've had to do a lot of that in my life. So as Anna said, I sometimes perform poetry and incorporate text in my art here. So this one says, "For all the petals lost along the road." So to me, this one's more like an art poem or a poem object before than just art. It depends on what the process is, I think, what I think it is in the end. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, that's not the one I was expecting, but I can talk about this one. Yeah, so this is Rebirth. I've been making cloth sculptures recently this year more. So that one I made, I think, last year, the one previously. So I'm interested in anatomy, but I can't follow patterns. So what I do is work the way the body would work. I start making a skeleton from wire, and then I put the fabric around it like it's flesh, and then bind the top fabric almost like skin. So to me, my figures are all naked. It's skin, not clothing I'm putting on the top of them. So this figure's inspired by a Madonna and child, and it's about connection and bonding. So I didn't take to milk as a baby. I didn't feed well. And feeding seems to be such a key bonding piece. People bond together through food quite often, something I find quite difficult to do. So I chose this particular act of feeding to represent our need for connection. And although some people maybe noticed that for the first time over lockdown, that feeling of loneliness and how that impacts our mental health, many folk have lived with that for a very long time and understand what it's like when you need to connect. And you can connect to other people. Some people connect to animals, to objects, to place, but that need is so human. So the title refers to the idea of being able to choose and remake connection, a kind of rebirth. That connection and bonding, of course, doesn't have to be done in the prescribed way, and you can remake it. As I say, when I make art, it takes me from quite a negative place. The thing I'm going to make in the first place doesn't often turn out to be the thing I make in the end, because the act of making it transforms how I feel about the subject. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is just a detail. I'm interested in folklore, myths, archetypes, fairy tales, folk magic, that kind of thing. I use ritual and folk magic in my own life. For me, it's a mechanism for creating context, to process, to understand, cope with difficulties. It's meditative and transformative life practice. Now, other folk will have different ways. They might have literal ways about using magic. That's grand. You know, whatever anyone uses things for is fine. So this piece contains a folk magic bag. The contents are quite personal, but it represents a placenta, which is connected to the cord and the baby. So as I work thinking like anatomy, I made a space inside the adult to represent a womb, and that's where it sits. So although the magic inside my work is personal, through making it, the work is not personal. It becomes much more general, and it is the act of making that allows that to happen. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is the nursing chair I made. It's made from fallen and thorn branches, thorned because connection is precarious. And it's bound with red clutes. So in Scotland, well, in Scots, a clute is a wee bit of cloth or a rag. I think it's sometimes called that in other areas too. So this clute was dipped in the Monlochie healing well in the Black Isle. It's known as a clutie well. So there's a tradition of, if you have an injury, a trouble, you would dip the clute into the well and then tie it to a tree. And as it rots, your pain, your trouble rots with it. And that's the tradition. So I could talk quite a lot about my visit to Monlochie Well and why I didn't actually tie my clute to a tree. I did a different ritual and brought it home, but we don't have a lot of time today. It's a really interesting place. There's a lot of these wells around the country. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is called Death Meditation. It's a companion piece to Rebirth. It's the other half of the life cycle. It's inspired by a Catholic Pieta. If you don't know the Pieta, it's where the Virgin Mary is cradling the dead Christ off the cross. So she's cradling her dead son. So for my piece, this is now the child in the original piece that's grown up and is carrying the adult in a role reversal of need, care and responsibility, connection and bonding. It's a reminder of our own cycle and our own death and our own inevitable need for care. it's very important to me, the idea of interdependence versus independence. We tend to get sold on this idea of independence in our country at least, and the reality is that we are all dependent on each other, our environment. It's an interdependence of being human. It's inevitable. So again, here the outermost cloth here is skin, not clothing. Both figures are naked. I reverse the same fabric. It's from an old dress. Both sides have, they're both cloth with roses on them from both sculptures. And I just reverse the cloth for the other sculpture. Can I have another slide, please? Yes, this is just a close-up. So inside the adult figure, there's metal wire, there's a little cave in the abdomen, and the twisted wire goes right up internally through the chest and out and into the throat. It was from a piece I made. I was going to make something different, and then something happened in my life and I changed to make this one. So originally the mouth was open and the wire was coming out of the mouth. So this time I changed that. I pushed it back in and I sewed the mouth shut. But the exclamation, I guess, is implied. It's all held inside with this one. There's a stone there with red thread. It's bound in red thread. Red thread, red as a colour is really important in folk magic, and red, blue, and often black. And red thread particularly is used quite often. Again, those are both pieces about interdependence, about our environment. So the folk magic bag this time is in each heart that are connecting the two pieces. And again, it's the same thing. I've used that cord, like the umbilical cord that connects these two hearts at a different phase in your life. So I think I've got another slide. I'm not sure if I've got it with this one, but the chair in the background, it's another bound chair that I've made. But the branches on this one are smooth, but it's worn down. And the flowers are a lily of the valley, which turns out has a lot of symbolic meanings. It can mean the sadness of death. I think it has actually something to do with spring in some cultures as well, and it often represents tears. And I found out later that it actually represents, in one story, the Virgin Mary's tears on the death of her son, which is really interesting because I work very instinctively. I don't plan an awful lot. I have a vague idea what I want to do, and then it's as I'm making, it tells me what I want to do. So there's a lot of serendipity in it, and that happens with materials as well. I'll often just find something on a walk and it's exactly the right thing I need to finish a piece. I use a lot of old jewellery, old well, anything, clothing, all that stuff, whatever's lying around. And so these flowers came from an old hairpiece that I'd made from something that was already old that I found in a shop. They'd been made, remade and remade. And I just wanted flowers. So it was quite interesting. As it turned out, those were very meaningful flowers I ended up using. Didn't expect that. So again, it's this remaking and transforming things. I'm interested in cycles and the cycles of nature and cosmic cycles that are about remaking and transforming. I think I've got one more slide. No, I thought I did. That's okay.
Yeah, that was your last slide, I think.
Ah, okay. Well, that's all from me then. I'm not sure if there's any questions. I'm not great at reading chat. I get quite distracted, sorry.
No, you did great. So thank you so much for your lovely presentation and, you know, so much depth in what you were sort of saying there. But